Brace yourself as we explore the real life, unsettling experiences of ordinary people who found themselves face to face with something supernatural.
Earlier in my relationship with my boyfriend, I used to stay at his house quite a bit. We'd spend our nights there together, and most of the time, it was peaceful. But one night stands out more than the others because of what happened. I was restless. No matter how much I tossed and turned, I couldn't get comfortable or fall asleep. After a while, I felt bad for all the moving around, so I decided to migrate to the couch. I didn't want to wake him up by constantly adjusting my position. And honestly, I was starting to get a little irritated with myself for not being able to settle down. It was around 2 to 3 a.m. when I finally gave up, grabbed my phone, and moved to the living room. I flopped onto the couch, defeated, and started scrolling through my phone to distract myself. The house was completely silent, and it was dark except for the light from my phone screen. A few minutes went by, and suddenly I had this unsettling feeling. You know when you feel like you're being watched, even though you're alone? I looked over towards the hallway, and that's when I saw it, a shadow figure peeking around the corner. It was tall, easily over 6 feet off the ground. It wasn't fully visible, just part of its head peeking around the corner, like it was trying to be sneaky. It gave off the creepiest vibe, because it wasn't just standing there, it was actively watching me, like it was trying not to be seen, but was still completely focused on me. I couldn't see any clear features, but I didn't need to. The intense feeling of being watched was enough. It felt like it was staring straight into my soul, and it was unnerving. I stared back at it for a while, trying to process what I was seeing and to make sure I wasn't imagining things. It wasn't until after about a minute of this bizarre staring contest that it clicked. I was having a face-off with a shadow figure. My body just reacted, and I audibly said, "Nope." I turned over to face the couch, closed my eyes, and surprisingly fell asleep within a few minutes. The next day, I didn't mention it to my boyfriend. He gets spooked pretty easily, and I didn't want to freak him out. But the whole experience stuck with me, so while he was at work, I decided to sage the house. I didn't really know if it would help, but I figured it couldn't hurt to try. As I went through the rooms, I gave the spirit, or whatever it was, an eviction notice, making it clear it wasn't welcome anymore. Fast forward to the following night. I woke up in the middle of the night to my boyfriend sitting straight up in bed, shaking. He looked terrified. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me he had woken up to see bright headlights shining through the window. But it wasn't just the lights that had scared him, it was who he saw. He said his uncle had been standing outside the window, staring straight at him. The problem was, his uncle had died in a car accident when he was young. Boyfriend had never even met him. It turns out his uncle had been seen before by other family members. His cousin, who looked a lot like my boyfriend and the uncle, had seen him multiple times. Apparently, the uncle had a habit of peeking around corners and watching those who resembled him. The family believed he visited those who shared his features, but no one else in the family had ever encountered him. That's when it clicked for me. I put 2 and 2 together and realized that what I had seen the previous night must have been his uncle. I think the uncle wasn't too happy with me for trying to cleanse the house and kick him out. He probably wanted to make sure my boyfriend knew he was still around, even if I had saged the place. But the thing is, the figure didn't feel menacing or evil when I saw it. Looking back, it felt familiar in a way, though at the time, it was definitely unsettling. After all, it was a large, dark figure lurking around a corner, completely fixated on me in a silent house. Out of curiosity, the next morning, I decided to open up one of those ghost communication apps while my boyfriend was away at work. I didn't expect much, but as soon as I opened it, the first words that popped up were car, headlights, and crash. It freaked me out, to be honest. I wasn't sure if the app was a hoax or not, but the relevancy of the words to what had just happened was too eerie to ignore. I kept the app open for a while, watching the words that came across the screen and asking questions. Some of the responses seemed to line up with the questions I was asking, which only added to the weirdness of the whole experience. I haven't seen his uncle since that night, and we've since moved to a different place. But part of me wonders if I'll encounter that shadowy figure again one day, peeking around a corner and watching me. It was definitely one of the more bizarre experiences I've had, and while I don't miss the feeling of being watched, I wouldn't be surprised if the uncle shows up again at some point. I knew this family that grew up on the shores of Lake Monroe in Indiana. They lived on site at a boat dock and managed the slips there. It was a simple life, just the mom and her 3 sons. They worked the docks together, hauling gear, tying up boats, and taking care of the property. The boys had lived there their whole lives, surrounded by the lake, the trees, and the quiet isolation that came with it. One evening, I was hanging out with the boys around a campfire. We had been drinking a bit, just shooting the breeze, when the eldest brother started talking about the history of the lake. He mentioned how there was an abandoned town beneath the waters, its citizens relocated, and the valley intentionally flooded to create the reservoir. It was eerie to think about an entire town submerged beneath the surface, hidden away from the world, so that the wealthy could enjoy the lake on their yachts and fishing boats. The image stuck with me, an old town forgotten underwater, its streets and buildings still there, but unreachable. After that, I asked the brothers if they had any spooky stories from growing up near the lake. I expected them to shrug it off or maybe tell a joke, but their reaction surprised me. All 3 of them immediately launched into a detailed account of something strange and unsettling, the haunting in the back room of their home. They all spoke at once, overlapping each other, as if they had rehearsed this story 1,000 times, as if it was something that lived with them every day. The room they were talking about was a later addition to their log cabin, built onto the back of the house sometime in the 70s. The room wasn't anything special, just a small, raised bedroom with cheap windows and minimal insulation, sitting on stilts to keep it level with the rest of the house. But according to the brothers, it was unlike any other room in the cabin. First off, the room was always colder than the rest of the house. I laughed when they told me this, thinking it was just bad construction. But they got serious and told me that it wasn't just cooler. It could get freezing cold, even in the middle of summer. Cold enough to see your breath. That's when I realized they weren't just talking about drafts or poor insulation. They were convinced something unnatural was going on. The brothers always found the room creepy, but it was the guests who stayed there that seemed to bear the brunt of whatever was wrong with it. Anytime someone spent the night in that room, they would mention feeling a hostile or oppressive presence, something lurking just out of sight. Guests had been woken up in the middle of the night by slaps on the face, strange whispering, or hissing noises. Some even claimed they had seen shadows moving in the corners of the room. Almost every time, the guests would leave the room in the middle of the night, retreating to the couch in the den. I have to admit, at that point, I wasn't too impressed. It felt like your typical haunted house story, so I decided to push them a little further. I goaded them, asking if that was the best they had. Surely, living by the lake all their lives, they had something better. That's when they told me about the ghost girl. The 2 eldest brothers had a habit of going catfishing late at night. They'd take a boat out into the darkness, setting up near the shore where the fish liked to hide. It was during one of these nights that they first saw it, a pale, white light flickering along the shoreline. At first, they didn't think much of it. They figured it was just another fisherman out noodling, maybe someone with a lantern or flashlight. But the next morning, they realized the light hadn't been on the shore at all. It had been halfway up the side of a steep cliff, bobbing along as if it were walking. After that, they started seeing the light more often. Sometimes it would appear on the water, sometimes near the rocks, but it was always the same flickering white light, moving as if it had a purpose. They didn't talk much about it, mostly because they didn't want to freak each other out. But one night, around 3 a.m., they decided to get a closer look. The light was bobbing along a low stretch of shoreline, so they approached in their boat. As they got closer, they realized the light wasn't just a light. It was a figure, a girl or a woman dressed in a white nightgown walking barefoot along the edge of the water. She didn't seem to notice them, just kept walking, her feet barely making a sound. The brothers called out to her, asking if she needed help, but she didn't respond. She didn't even look at them. Thinking they might have scared her, they circled around in the boat to get in front of her, trying again to get her attention. This time, when they got a good look at her, they saw something that made their blood run cold. It wasn't just a girl, it was a girl with no face. They swore up and down that what they saw was real. They described it with a kind of urgency, the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves as much as they're trying to convince you. The girl had no face, just smooth, pale skin where her features should have been. I was sitting there, listening to these boys, and I could feel the tension in the air. These were guys who had spent the whole night trying to act macho, flirting with me, and pretending they weren't scared of anything. But when they talked about the ghost girl, their whole demeanor changed. They were genuinely shaken, like this was something that had haunted them for years. I don't know if the details of their story were meant to be terrifying, but it wasn't the facts that got to me. It was the way they told it, the way they all seemed to have lived through this together. Either they had been practicing this story for years, or it was something they had truly experienced just a couple 100 feet from where we were sitting that night. The memory of it stuck with me. Maybe it wasn't the scariest thing I'd ever heard, but the sincerity in their voices made it hard to forget.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, smack that like button and subscribe for more. Make sure to have notifications on and check our channel for other videos.